And good morning, everyone. It's good to have you here. The title of my talk this morning is True Freedom. And I want to begin by telling a little story about something that happened, I'm guessing 15 years ago. I was leading a short retreat in a men's prison in California. And at the end of the retreat, a young man came up to me with a smile on his face and some tears in his eyes. And he looked at me and he says, "Reverend, I'm going to thank you for leading this retreat and for teaching." He says, "Because I've just learned meditation a few years ago. And when I meditate," he says, "I feel totally free." He says, "My heart is free to go anywhere." And I was deeply touched by what he had to say. And he went on to say that if I would have started this 10 years ago, I wouldn't be here today. I wouldn't need drugs. I wouldn't need all of the stuff that I thought I needed back then. And I said to him, "Javier, maybe you had to come and be a prisoner in order to find freedom, to find out what freedom really is. Because there's a lot of people on the outside that are not as free as you are." And I wanted to hug this young man, but I wasn't able to because the prisoners were not allowed to touch staff members. So I gave him a deep bow. And I remember his face as if it was yesterday. The teacher George Gurdjieff, Russian teacher, would often say, humankind in its unawakened state, which is largely our current state, humankind is not free. Humankind is in prison. And the thing that keeps us in prison more than anything else is that we don't know that we're in prison. We think that we're free. Because unlike Javier, our prison bars are not visible. They're invisible, they're internal. But they're just as real, if not more so. And those prison bars, which really are the prison bars of the mind, anytime we're identified with the mind, we are subject to its limitations. And so every belief, every unfelt pain, every incomplete experience that we hold from the past can be like a bar that creates this prison in which we live. Now, some people seem to be happy in prison and don't want to get out, and it's perfectly okay. But some of us recognize that we're not free. And that Gurdjieff identified as the first step towards freedom, was recognizing that we're not free. And I would say the second step might be having a strong desire to become free. And then the third step is seeing that those bars are not something installed inside of us that we can't change, but the prison bars are actually recreated moment by moment by moment. We recreate our internal reality. It's not something that's tangible and fixed that we can't escape. And there's one more step, and I want to talk about that a little bit later. But I would like to tell you a story about Mohini. This is a story that I recorded in one of my books, I believe. Mohini was a beautiful, vital, alive Siberian tiger. And Mohini was given to the Washington, D.C. Zoo, the National Zoo, sometime in the 60s, the early 60s. And at that time, I think just about all zoos put the animals in cages. This is before the idea of the natural habitat being created. So this very alive, very powerful, very strong, energetic tiger was locked up in a cage, 10 by 10, the most. And Mohini, being so vitally alive, had nowhere to go with her energy and the power that was flowing through her, the life that was flowing through her. So all she could do is pace back and forth, in a figure eight. She did that for years and years. And then the time came when the zoo created a natural habitat. And the zoo personnel were very excited to see how Mohini would respond to being turned free, turned loose in this natural habitat. And they envisioned her running around and being all excited, playing. There was a pond, there was a hill, there was a cave, there were several trees. But when they turned Mohini loose in that environment, she did not run around checking out the environment, playing, rejoicing at her freedom. She found the nearest corner, ran to it, and began pacing in a figure eight, 10 by 10. And she paced back and forth so long that it wore the grass out. And she continued that until the day she died, sadly. Mohini never left her cage. Somehow her brain had become so used to the paces that she could not break free of that behavior. Not totally unlike ourselves. We learn our paces when we're young. We learn to live in the cage that we are put in, so to speak. The mental cage, hopefully. Not a physical one, but some people, some children experience that even. But whatever the bars are, that's what we feel defines our world. And it doesn't. Unlike Mohini, unlike a tiger, we humans have the ability to become free. But it's not easy. Again, we need to recognize that they're there. And then we need to recognize that we're suffering. Life is dukkha, is the first noble truth taught by the Buddha. And dukkha is caused by our delusions, our beliefs that are not true, or our deep, deep instincts that hold us in this prison. But as I mentioned, these bars are not physical, they're not permanent. They're constantly recreated. So the bars really are a pattern, kind of like Mohini's paces. We wake up in the morning and put those bars back in without realizing it. And that becomes what we call self, me. Now, some of us live in rather maybe attractive cages, plush, spa, massage table, exercise room, entertainment center. So we distract ourselves, but we don't realize that we're in prison because we're so distracted by our entertainment. But for some of us, that's not enough. We realize that despite all of the pretty things that we have, that we're not free. And so the work then begins being aware of how we recreate these bars and the prison walls over and over again. And there's another factor at work, and this is one we often don't see, and that is that, in a sense, we have to pay a ransom to get out of jail. We have to pay a ransom, if you will, to the prison guard. And the ransom is in this form. I'll talk about a movie. Might be the best way to describe it. If you've seen the movie Awakenings with Robin Williams, where he plays the role of a psychiatrist or a medical doctor, and he's in this institution where there are several people that have been catatonic for many years. They literally haven't moved. They're like statues. Most of them are rather old and have spent much of their life immobile, totally dead. Their heart's still beating, but other than that, they're as if they're dead. And the staff at the institution pretty much wrote these folks off and, did whatever they needed to do to keep them alive, but didn't try to bring them out of their state because nothing seemed to work. And Robin Williams, the character of Robin Williams, believed that these people had the possibility of becoming free. And so he worked on developing various drugs and medications to give to them. And lo and behold, eventually, these folks begin to move. And they begin to come alive. And they begin to even dance. They had a party. And they were even having more fun than Robin Williams was, you see. It was so interesting. He was he was very good at what he did, but he too was a prisoner of his own mind. And they perhaps were freer than he was. But then he began to talk to them and he said, what year is it? Oh, it's 1935, 1924, 1940. That's when they went to sleep. That's all they remember. And he couldn't convince them otherwise until he had them look in the mirror. And they looked in the mirror, and in their mind, they were 25 years old. But the image they saw in the mirror was someone that was 75 years old. And they felt great chagrin, great pain, immense grief of having that loss. And so one by one, it seemed like they went back to sleep, back to the catatonic state. Who knows why, but perhaps it was too painful to feel the loss, to feel the grief. And so that's an experience that we have. As we awaken, we realize that there's a sense of loss. How many years, how many even lifetimes perhaps we've been lost. We've been in prison and haven't known it. But we as human beings, and when we're free, have the ability to experience that grief in a very different way. Because we can experience from the place of freedom, not from the place of being a prisoner. And yes, we feel the grief, but we feel the grief as what I sometimes call butterfly tears. It's the kind of tears that I fantasize that a butterfly feels when he flutters past his old cocoon and thinks about the good old days. And perhaps also feels the sadness of, geez, I spent so much time as a caterpillar, struggling, eating leaves, destroying my environment. And so much time in a tiny little world of the caterpillar. And now I see a new freedom. So it's painful to feel that sense of loss. But we can realize, even though the pain is not going to necessarily go away, we can context it very differently and see that the prison really is a cocoon. For each of us, whatever our limitation is, it's not a mistake, it's not a sin, it's not a bad thing that you and I are doing, but it's a necessary part of our evolution. And like the butterfly being a caterpillar and being in the cocoon is a necessary part of being a butterfly. And the butterfly can even appreciate freedom all the more, having experienced the pain of being a little worm crawling around, you say. And so as we look back at our lives, and perhaps we have many regrets and a great deal of grief, we can see that all of that is very necessary. And it's not bad, it's not really a loss. It simply feels like it. That which is death to the caterpillar, that which is death to the caterpillar is the beginning of life for the butterfly. And so birth and death are relative. All depends upon how we see it. So I'd like to close with this poem from Rumi, Sufi master Rumi. He says, I died as a mineral and then became a plant. I died as a plant and rose to that of animal. I died as animal and I was human. Why should I fear? When was I made less? By dying. Happy Freedom Day to each of you.